Good morning and welcome to you all to the annual general meeting of the Leicestershire County Council Pension Fund. You all should have access to the papers of the meeting, which are published on the County Council website. The meeting is being broadcast live YouTube and will also be available for viewing following the meeting. So item 1 on the agenda is I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of December 2022 be approved. Is that agreed? Yep. Okay, thank you. Item 2, question time. We have not received any questions. Item 3, questions asked by members. We have not received any questions. Item 4 is urgent items. Not at the moment, no. We usually have prior notice of questions. Okay. So there are no urgent items. Declarations of interest. Does anyone present today have any declaration of interest to declare? No. So we're all free of declarations of interest. The next item is item 6, Pension Fund Annual Report and Accounts 2022-23. On to the first substantive item, which is the annual reports and accounts on pages 9 to 110 the agenda pack. So Declan Keegan, Director of the Corporate Resources, Ian Howe, Pensions Manager, and Bhulesh Karcher, Senior Financial Analyst, will talk through the presentation on the annual report and accounts, and Kat Tui will update us on the fund's responsible investment. This will be followed by a question and answer session. So over to you, Declan.
Thank you, Chair. So the Chair's outline, we'll just give a quick overview basically of what's the contents of the annual report, and the accounts is obviously kind of pretty lengthy documents, so hopefully give it in a slightly more kind of digestible format. So if you can flip on to the next slide, Angie. Thanks. So just starting off with what actually is the LGPS, and obviously kind of it's a national sort of pension scheme, and the important piece about the national is embodied in kind of statute. So any of the benefits that are guaranteed to sort of the employees as they accrue, that is sort of set in law. It's not sort of a local discretion, apart from around the margins of sort of some very small pieces. The actual core benefits are kind of, like I say, enshrined in law. And for LGPS, the name is slightly misleading, the local government pension scheme, because it does include administrative people working in establishments like fire, police, universities, schools, colleges as well. So it's kind of a pretty broad scheme. So it's better off thinking of sort of, I suppose, the public sector sort of scheme for administrative staff in the sort of the area of sort of the Leicestershire County, City and Rutland, rather than just sort of restricted to LGPS. And the benefits we accrue at the moment are all kind of defined benefits, but they're on a career average basis. Historically, what did used to be on a sort of a final salary basis, but there was some reforms a few years ago. So it has helped to simplify the scheme in the long term. The short term, it does create quite a lot of kind of technical aspects, and Ian will touch on it in sort of the McLoud ruling in terms of how things have changed and almost get caught out in that transition. The scheme's big. We've got about 100,000 members, and again, Ian will touch on these a bit, and that's spread over 180 different employing organisations. And I didn't mention before, but some private sector in there as well. It's not just a pure public sector scheme. Coming along with being a national scheme, we do get sort of national oversight. There's a scheme advisory board that sort of brings together kind of national representatives, both on the employee and on the employer side, that do sort of set out a lot of the guidance for how the sort of scheme operates, which obviously is useful for something as important as pensions. And in a great extent, that's mirrored in how we work locally as well. And again, Ian will touch on it a bit more in terms of the governance of the scheme. But we've got two principal bodies. We've got a committee that's the main decision-making body, that's kind of a mixture of representatives of both employees and employers, to sort of make sure we kind of we're mindful of, I suppose, the approach we're taking with pensions is in line with what they'd sort of both bodies would expect. And the pension board, which is there to make sure the governance of the scheme is kind of operating as it should be. I suppose just general in terms of that sort of the committee, just going back on that decision-making role, it is very much a kind of they're not called trustees, but to all intents and purposes, the the members of that committee are acting as trustees, because basically we're just looking after other people's money. The £5.5 billion scheme isn't there for to spend on other purposes. It purely, the sole objective is to make sure there's money to pay pensions when they fall due in the future. So it is kind of a slightly different role to committees normally in the kind of local government spaces. It is more that sort of trustee working on behalf of others, because effectively we're levying on employers a sufficient amount of monies to make sure that those pensions can become due, whereas the employees have the amounts fixed by statute. So that's all I was going to say as a bit of a quick oversight. So just hand over to Ian, who'll pick up the introduction to the Leicestershire Fund.
Thank you, Declan. Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, thank you. So as Declan's touched on, there's two sides to the kind of the governance. There's the Pensions Committee, chaired by Councillor Barclay, who's chairing today's AGM, and they've got the sort of the delegated authority for taking the overall responsibility for the fund. There's representatives made up of both members and members from the effectively acting on behalf of the employers and members effectively acting on the employees. And we have a university rep who also sits on the committee as well. There are 3 non-voting scheme members. And the principal aim is to consider pension matters with a view to safeguarding the interests of scheme members' benefits. Then we have the local pensions board, that's chaired by Councillor Rosetta Page, 3 employee reps, 3 member reps, and they assist in the administration of the pensions and effectively have a kind of a governance role, ensuring that the compliance is being taken place, and any points they wish to raise, then they can raise those, and that goes up to Pensions Committee. Next slide, thank you. So on the admin side, so this is kind of the primary role of myself and my team. So what do we really do in the pension section? So we're there to calculate and pay all types of pension benefits. We have new people obviously joining the scheme, and they request estimates at various times. There can be various times in a person's working life when they might need an estimate. Obviously, the norm is when they're coming up towards retirement, but there are other times as well. We also administer when employers are leaving the scheme to ensure that any money due from that employer is paid to the scheme, to effectively allow us to pay the ongoing pension benefits when that employer's left, but those scheme members are still there. We're there to manage any regulation changes. So regulation changes come through from DLUC. And Declan's touched on McLoud, which I'll come on to. That was a big regulation change that came in only a few months ago, and we're working through that at the moment, which I'll touch on later. We do year end. Year end is a statutory duty to produce annual benefit statements by the 31st of August of the following of that year. So let's say the next 31st of March, the annual benefit statements have to go out by the 31st of August. We also have another statutory requirement to issue pension taxation statements for people who breach the annual allowance by the 6th of October as well. And every 3 years we do the fund valuation to ensure there's enough money coming in from the employers to effectively make sure that we're paying the benefits that are then going out. In terms of the governance, we do put reports to the pension board as part of the fund's annual report, and then there's obviously ongoing reports throughout the year. Those meetings are every quarter. Slide. Next slide again. So there's some scheme membership stats to give you an idea of how the membership has changed in the last 3 years. So the figures on the column on the right are the numbers at 31st of March 2023, and as you can see there, the total is for the first time it's over 100,000. So we're now at 103,194. That number has increased again since March 23, and you'll see that in the last sort of couple of years we've had an increase in the kind of the brown line, and that's the pensioners. The pensioners now overtaken the reserve members. Reserve members, those members who have left the scheme but they've still got benefits frozen that are due to come into payment. So it shows that the numbers are still on the increase. We're an increasingly growing scheme. Next slide. So there's the admin stats for 22-23. So what we do there is we record how many stats we do in each particular area. I won't go through those line by line, but I think the key ones to point out are the retirements. Somewhere in the region between 2,500 to 3,000 is a sort of a normal year. So retirements were fairly normal in the year. New starters over 10,000, that figure at the bottom. So we're still getting a lot of new members coming into the scheme from all the various employers that Declan's already mentioned. Auto enrolment keeps that number kind of increasing as well. So every 3 years, employers auto enroll their scheme members, and unless they then come back out, then they stay in the scheme. So that number continues to rise. All the other numbers are fairly static in terms of what you'd expect in a scheme year. These are the key performance indicators. What we do is we ask members for their feedback. That feedback can go out in two ways. It can either go out with in letters, with letters, and there's a kind of a questionnaire for scheme members to fill in, or we can do it online. And members can send their information back to us on how they think we've dealt with their whatever the case is. It could be a retirement, it could be whatever it is, a death or anything else. The information on the left is the business process KPIs, and there's 3 of those. So there's retirements within retirement notifications to members within 10 working days of receiving the information, pension payments within 10 working days, and informing members of deaths or benefits within 10. We were close to target on all 3. We were very slightly out on the deaths. We achieved 85% of cases within the year. Target was 90. And we were very close on the retirement benefits. That was 91%. Target was 92. And we very slightly exceeded the pension benefits to payments within the 10 days. That was 96%. So I think you'll agree, in a whole year, looking at those numbers that you saw on the earlier slides, that's a good rate of return. Still room for improvement, but pleasing figures. The information on the right is the customer feedback. So that's on various things, which I won't go through line by line, but you can see in those areas that the numbers are pretty much above target in all. The experience of dealing with the pension section was 91%, and the target was 95%. But again, I think good values for a full year. Looking ahead, if you go to the next slide, there's 2 things I'm going to talk about: McLoud and dashboard. So McLoud is the key change that Declan mentioned and I mentioned earlier. Just to give a little bit of context, what McLoud is, there was a judicial review of the pension scheme regulations. It was brought about by an age discrimination case that was actually in other public sector schemes, but it's affected all public sector schemes. And it was brought about by younger scheme members who were discriminated against because their benefits weren't protected, whereas the older members were. And the protection is effectively paying the higher of the career average benefits or the final salary benefits. The scheme changed from final salary to career average in April 14. But what we have to do now under the McLoud ruling is basically do that for all scheme members. So compare the 2. And if we find that the final salary benefits are now generating a higher pension, what we call an underpin, then we put that into payment. It's been a huge exercise, and it remains a large exercise because we've got to go retrospectively back to look at cases since April 2014. We're doing it in phases because of the size of the exercise. So what we've done first is we've brought the system in to run it for scheme members who are retiring now. So as a scheme member retires now or leaves now, their benefits are run with the McLoud remedy in place. If we find that the underpin is higher, which is the guarantee effectively, then we pay that, so the member is getting paid the higher value. That will continue, and that will be for all future cases that those members in scope. We will then go back and do the exercise to look at all the cases retrospectively from 2014. Big exercise, lots of work still to be done, and there's still plenty more for us. It's also impacted on the employers because the employers have had to provide all that data to us in order to build those records. So thanks to all the employers in the scheme, 180 that Declan talked about, they've all worked really hard with us on this as well. So grateful to all of those. But the important thing from a costing side, McLoud was included in the evaluation and will continue to be for future valuation as well. So it's already been scoped into the cost of the fund moving ahead. Next slide. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was dashboards. I don't know whether you're aware of dashboards already, but there's a national move to improve the pensions experience. And what's happening is a national dashboard is being set up that will allow scheme members from any pension scheme to kind of tap into the dashboard. There'll be some security checks that they have to go through. And once they've gone through those, they'll then be able to look to see any pension benefits they've got from anywhere. So we will be responsible for actually ensuring our data gets up to the dashboard, as well as all other pension schemes across the UK. And that's public schemes, personal schemes, company schemes. And then a member will be able to go on and view all their pension information in one place. It's a very, very big national pensions exercise, this. And there obviously is quite a few technical points to work through, obviously data security and a number of other things, but there's a lot of work to be going through in the pensions environment in this. Now, the LGPS is due to go live in 2025, but there's two phases to this. The first phase is the onboarding, which is us being able to provide the information, and that's that 2025 date. Because of McLoud, the LGPS has been given a bit of extra discretion, and our actual members won't actually be able to view their data until 2026. That'll work through. Hopefully, we'll be on there before then, and members will be able to see it earlier. But there's more scope to work through there. So that's where we are on dashboard. So that's going to be the next big exercise that we work through in conjunction with McLoud. But they're the two big administrative areas.
Thank you, Ian. Do you want Bulgash, if you could provide a report?
Thank you, Chair. Next slide, please, Angie. So our first slide is our current investment goals, and it hasn't changed much over the last few years. You know, we've always taken a long-term view on investment returns, stretching out over 20 years, as you'd expect for an open scheme like ourselves. We've got a continued commitment to responsible investment with a new comprehensive net zero strategy, which Kat will talk to later, which is now approved after a successful engagement and consultation, which ran through most of 2022. We take a balanced view between long-term returns and risk, and that's assessed annually with the fund's investment advisor, Hymans Robertson. We take a strategic asset allocation review paper to a January committee in the main, and it takes up most of that meeting. So we do look at the asset allocation in detail once a year. We do have considerable diversification to asset classes, in the main to balance risk. And we also try and manage down the roster of investment managers. Now we've got around 20 or so at the minute, and it's been gradually decreasing, helped by the fact that our preference to investing is with our pool, and that's LGPS Central, who can offer investments in various asset classes. So we have one manager looking after a number of investment products, and we'll look at LGPS Central in a moment as well. Again, our commitment to asset pooling continues, improving our ESG goals, and in turn generating cost savings, not only from pooling, but also from our existing external managers. We've got a little graph at the bottom there showing the size of the fund over the last 10 years, stretching back to the 31st of March 2014 at 2.7 billion, and 10 years on where we are now, which is more than double the size. This is our asset allocation as at the end of March 2023. It looks a little messy on that pie chart there, but if you start at listed equity at around 44% and follow it clockwise round, you go through the first three asset classes there. So that's listed equity, private equity, and targeted return together, called the growth income group, the growth asset group. And that's about 59% of the total fund. The next 5 or so, that's infrastructure, private credit, property, liquid global credit, and emerging market credit, form the income group, and that's about 31%. And finally, we've got inflation-linked bonds and investment-grade bonds. Together, they form part of the protection portfolio, and together with cash and the currency hedge, about 10% of the portfolio as at March 23. A slide familiar from previous years shows the last 5 years investment performance against the benchmark. The table on the right, top right, is a discrete financial years. So you've got 5.2% into 18-19 all the way down to a minus 1.3 in 22-23. And we've got the benchmark numbers next to it, so you can see how well we performed against the benchmark. Now, individual calendar years are less important, and that's why we have the cumulative performance over 1, 3, and 5 years. Focusing on 3 and 5 in particular, you can see over the last 3 years a 10.4% actual performance versus a benchmark of 8.8, so a slight outperformance there. And similarly, over a longer period of time, 6.3% for the actual performance and 5.8 against the benchmark. I said earlier we'd talk about LGPS Central. That's our first protocol when assessing the investment needs of the fund, and that's the pooling vehicle that we're part shareholder of. It's one of 8 investment pooling companies in the country. It's been in operation for about 6 years now. In total, £21 billion worth of assets are managed by Central, and that covers the 8 equal partners, which range across much of the central region of England, Nottinghamshire down to Worcestershire. They offer a combination of internally managed and externally managed investment products. They cover passive funds, active funds, private markets. In total, there are 27 products that have been launched by Central over those 6 years. It gives us a single manager, like I said earlier, covering multiple asset classes, helps us manage down our roster, improves our governance, and gives us cost savings. It gives us access to specialist ESG, climate risk reporting, and the fund has received its 4th annual climate risk report from Central on the 1st of December and presented to the committee. Given we're a shareholder of LGPS Central, we are able to influence the development of investment products in line with our strategic asset allocation. These are the products that Central have for us. We'll focus on the graph on the right. Really, it's showing how much of our total AUM is invested with Central, and that's 39% as at the 31st of March 2023. We also have a further 16% with Legal and General. Now, this was a collectively procured mandate with 7 shires in total, so we've got a really good low cost investment there, similar to what we'd have if that product was available at Central. So taken together, 39 and the 16 is what we tend to class as pooled, and that's 55% of the total funds. The bullet points on the left show you all the other products that the Leicestershire Fund has invested in. Thanks, Angie. A lot of words on this slide here. I'll focus on 3 asset classes in particular: infrastructure, private credit, and private equity. So these are the developments since the end of the financial year. So the fund does have a exposure to infrastructure, a target weight of 12.5%, which it's building towards. We use Central products, we use external products as well. We've invested within a timberland product over the last year or so. Private credit is another area where we've got a target allocation of 10.5 when we're building up towards that. It's largely been born out of when the GFC happened back in 2008 and banks kind of stepped away from providing finance. So it's a relatively new asset class, albeit been around for about 15 years now. We made our first commitments back in 2014, and we've continued making commitments with Central products. The last point on there is private equity. Provides access to returns from investments that are yet to be listed. It allows the fund to generate higher returns. There is, of course, the uncertainty of returns and the illiquid nature of these funds, which often gets us the what's known as the premium over listed markets. The last point at the bottom of that slide is that at the time of writing, there is significant uncalled commitments, about 600 million, of which 2/3 are to LGPS central products. Again, talking to our continued support of pooling. Slide then, G. The last slide here is talking about the pooling consultation outcomes. So the government consulted on the next steps on investments earlier in 2023 with a view to further reform of the LGPS. At the autumn statement last month, they considered 152 consultation responses, and the proposals included a number of proposals from government. In effect, they want to increase the pace of pooling. They want pools to be larger, and as doing so, they believe that would get bigger cost savings. We've got a number of items there to kind of point out the main points. The document's very lengthy, and these are just the main points from there. But in a sense, they want to move us to a faster pace of pooling, and to build bigger pools, 50 billion in the first instance, and then finally super pools at 200 billion. I'll hand over to Kat at that point to talk through our responsible investment strategy.
Thanks. So really, I'll kind of give you a whistle-stop tour over our responsible investment and then also our climate considerations over the past year. So I suppose kind of the basis of this is the fund considers responsible investment by incorporating environmental, social and governance factors into its decision-making and any ownership practices. So given the fund is a long-term investor, responsible investment considerations can boost long-term investment performance. So the fund can contribute to responsible investment in a few ways. So considers significant environmental, social and governance factors, including climate, on our investment, and acting responsibly by voting thoughtfully and engaging with the management of the companies we invest in. So we're supported by this by our membership of the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum, our fund managers and LGPS Central. So this approach is distinct from any ethical or moral stance. Instead, we expect our managers to look at these issues and the risk they may pose to our investments. The fund does not exclude companies, instead looks to encourage companies we may already be invested in to improve their ESG risk management or develop more sustainable business practices. This is key because as a long-term investor, we have an important voice in ensuring companies focus on the long-term value rather than short-term profit, which may be driven by short-term investors who are not concerned by ESG issues to the extent that institutional investors like the fund is. Next slide, please, Angie. So one significant area for the fund over the past few years has been climate change. The fund considers this a material risk, and this risk comes from kind of two key places. So we've got the risk that comes from any physical changes of climate change, so impact on the weather, how that might affect food supply and water availability, and also from the transition to a low carbon economy. So we might have issues where the underlying companies there's a carbon tax that's enforced, which may kind of impact their valuations. So understanding this as a material risk, as well as concerns for our members, we consulted on these targets and the net zero climate strategy over 2022 and early 2023. And we saw from those responses of over 1,700 members or responses, we know this is a key issue for scheme members, and that we manage these risks in a way that keeps the fund's financial returns at the right level, but also supports achieving net zero. So the strategy targets net zero by 2050. We've also with an ambition for sooner, alongside 8 targets. This approach looks to manage both the risks and opportunities that arise from climate change by working with managers, investing in climate solutions, and also engaging the companies we invest in. So on the next slide, it sets out some high-level progress against 3 of our targets. This is from the recent climate risk management report, which BS mentioned. This report also compared the fund against best practice and kind of expected government guidance. And this has all put the fund in a strong position against where any regulations that come in. So the climate risk management strategy sets out a ton of metrics and ways we can compare the fund. But again, these are just 3 of them. So we can see from our carbon intensity, we've already reduced it by 38% as of March 2023, against our target of a 50% reduction by 2030. This has largely been driven by a reduction in our allocation to high carbon intensive sectors and moving our funds to a climate multi-factor fund, as well as our next step in our low carbon transition fund. When looking at these metrics in comparison to kind of peer benchmarks, we also see we're performing really well. So we know we're on the right track in terms of our targets. I think what quite an important metric is that last one. So this has a far more forward-looking measure than the previous 2. So this is to try and understand the emission projections of the portfolio to see if our investments in material sectors are kind of aligning to net zero. So just on the last one. So that last metric, it takes into account a company's carbon transition score and whether they have a science-based target or an implied temperature rise of 2 degrees or lower. And when we flick onto the next slide, you'll see why that material sector is so important for us. So hopefully you can see, I know it's the numbers in there are quite small, but this slide sets out where our emissions stem from across our sectors. So material sectors, which includes construction, mining, and other kind of hard to abate sectors, that accounts for 39.4% of our emissions. And we can see that most of that sector is covered by engagement programs. So we know we're targeting the right areas. There's also the energy sectors and utility sectors, which again have quite a high engagement coverage. Next slide, please. This kind of is more our overall approach to RI, so it kind of sets out our voting numbers for the past year. So you see over 70,000 resolutions were voted at, and these ultimately should support the long-term economic interests of our stakeholders and try and keep the company boards accountable to shareholders. So the voting, in terms of our votes against, the majority of our votes against were related to board structure. So that can include issues such as insufficient independent oversight or not demonstrating good business conduct. There's kind of a broad reasoning below that. Next slide, please. So this is kind of talking about some of our investments more broadly. I know Bullish has mentioned a few of them, but the fund has been making investments for a number of years which correlate positive financial returns with climate considerations. So the fund has already invested with passive and equity funds that are less carbon intensive, less exposed to fossil fuel reserves, and have increased the allocation to renewables and other climate solutions. Bullish mentioned our investment in timberland. So this is our investment in forestry, which we've had since around 2011. So we had some work done by our investment managers. And if you kind of put that into context, that's the investments span 12 countries, and that's and we have the equivalent of 17% of Leicestershire's surface area in trees within our portfolio. And that's the equivalent of sequestering the annual emissions of nearly 250,000 cars annually. There's some other investments, so our Quimbrook Net Zero Power Fund, so that invests in solar power with battery systems, both as part of the decarbonisation of the energy system and the demand from data centres. And then we have some other investments where our investment managers incorporate ESG into their debt investments. So they'll set key performance indicators with requirements, and then that'll be beneficial to the company, cost of capital in the end. But I'll leave it there if you chair.
Thank you very much, Kat and Declan and Moulash, for comprehensive report. Has anybody got any questions they want to ask? Yes.
Yeah, I think that they're really great questions, and I think that's why it's so important for us to report annually against our climate metrics and targets. It is clear that a lot of the progress that has been made has been due to that reduction in exposure to those kind of high carbon intensity. But really, what we need, I think, as a society, is that real world emissions reduction. So, kind of the fund becoming net zero and then the world not doesn't help the fund. So I think that's what the key point to the fund in that engagement. But that's also why those metrics, which aren't just backward looking at how companies' financed emissions have been reducing, but those forward looking metrics on, are they setting science-based targets? Are the companies aligned to net zero? That'll be vital. But I know that's something the sector's struggling with more generally in terms of how do you keep how do you avoid greenwashing and create really meaningful data which can kind of lead investment decisions. But I know that's something I think people are struggling with.
You need to be addressing that so you can communicate with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we're addressing every year. I know at the moment these targets cover equities, but we've got the rest of the portfolio which we can't set targets for because there isn't that kind of standard that we can use. So that's something that we're working really hard with LGPS Central, and I think that will give us a lot better view of the pension funds investments and the journey to net zero more generally. But I know we have some kind of high level information from managers, and on our property portfolio, for example, they think they'll be net zero by 2044. So there's a kind of a wide range. And then we also have the timberland assets, which are net negative emissions. So we need to kind of have that big picture to see where the fund can go. On your second point on the consultation, I know it's the first time we did that, and I think we were really amazed at the response and the thoughtful responses we received. I mean, we've kind of set out, we'll look at the strategy in 3 years and we'll consult as part of that. I think it's also important for the fund to have a quite long-term view, so we can't make knee-jerk decisions, I think, and a year's maybe a bit short in terms of being able to change any investment decisions or strategically how the fund's set out. But we always listen to kind of the views of members. So if you have any thoughts, then please feel free to send them through.
Well, questionnaire once again. Jeffrey. Take the phone with it.
Thanks very much for your question. Right, Councillor Cartwright.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification regarding McLoud. It's really important to understand this came about as a result of a High Court judgment, not by any maladministration of anyone here or anyone else in the country. That said, you should also be congratulated for the way you're trying to address it as quickly as possible, and everybody will be reassessed. I have no doubt about that, and I'm comfortable in that position. And any adjustments made. That's not my question. My question just relates to it's very clear to understand that somebody who is currently a beneficiary, that will be resolved. Anybody that's a surviving beneficiary of a deceased, that will be resolved. My one specific clarity is around a deceased whose estate would have benefited. Is that also being looked into, Chair, and how will that be resolved? Because many of the estates will have been settled. So it's really the deceased estates, if there were any due. That's my point of clarification, if you're able to answer it, except you might not be able to.
Okay, thank you. I'll defer to you on this, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Good question. You're correct that people who have deceased with no further benefits, who were in scope, who may have then had an increase under the McLoud, there will be an additional element, an additional death grant or something of that nature. If that is the case, nationally, this is being looked at in terms of how it's then going to actually be actioned. Because you're right, there will be elements of potential benefits due to estates that have effectively closed. So we'll work through those. I don't anticipate there will be many of those cases. The reason I say that is that for somebody to be in scope and have died, they've got to be, dare I say, just normal age expectancy tends to mean that the people who are dying, pensioners with no further dependents, will be out of scope because they retired before McLoud legislation came into play, effectively before 2014. But inevitably there will be some, and yes, we will work through those. But we need the sort of the national guidance in terms of how that's going to be actually actioned. Is that all right?
Thanks for your question, Mr. Cartwright. I think there's a massive amount of work to do. But yeah, very good question. Yeah, but they will get there. They will. I'm quite sure Ian will guide us through that. So if there are no other questions, one other question, yeah.
If you're the speaker, I'd like to take that question a bit further, if I may, because what I've been observing in the last year is that some of the efforts at engagement have been drawing back because they don't believe it's getting them where they wish to. And I would be worried that we are going to end up with a fund that I think the term is called stranded assets, that there will come a point, and I think it will happen fast. That's going to be the problem. The risk is that the change might happen fast, that suddenly there'll be a big withdrawal from fossil fuels. Coal may be on the point of that happening now. Oil and gas will perhaps follow quite soon afterwards. And at the moment, we're getting a message, no, these got to be preserved, they've got to be kept going, but I think the climate change issue is not going to allow for that. And so suddenly these things will be taking place very quickly. And that even if you've been engaged with a company and it hasn't made enough movement and change, you're going to be stuck with an investment which doesn't bring the return which you were expecting.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We're really talking about stranded assets, and yeah, we're very, very much focused on that. So we're well aware of it. I don't know, Bullesh, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, it's a valid point, and it's not just one for the fund; it's one for the world as well. You know, as Kat mentioned earlier. But as a fund, and we can talk about what we've done for the fund. Is we saw some of the numbers earlier, how much we've decarbonised. You saw the reductions. We've set a 2030 target to be 50% lower in terms of intensity, carbon intensity. We're most of the way there already, but we've done the easy things. We've come out of places rather than get them to reduce emissions. We've just tilted our fund away into different areas, and that continues now. The snapshot here was 31st of March 2023. Earlier in December 23, we made another change to the fund where we moved into a low carbon transition fund with LGIM. That will further improve our standing, but from a whole world perspective, those assets are still out there. Those companies you're thinking of are still out there. And the only way to kind of affect that change, not just by ourselves, but the wider world, is via engagement, pulling our money away, losing the seat at the table, not being able to lobby or engage with them ideally doesn't help. And it's not the strategy the fund likes to keep. We'd want to engage first. And if once all of those avenues have been exhausted, then we'll move to the next.
Okay, thanks very much for that question. So if there are no other questions, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Local Pension Board Annual Report, which is on pages 111 to 122. Ian has referred to the work that is done by the Local Pension Board, which really has overseen a number of areas in its 4 meetings during the year, keeps an eye on the local pension committee, how we're doing with the administration, responsible investment, the valuation, risk management and internal control, the business plan, the McLoud report, funding strategy, and the net zero climate strategy, ABCs, and it's all laid out within the report. We're just noting this report. Has anybody got any questions? I can't think they would have, but if no, okay. So thanks for that. The next item is the report of the Local Pension Committee employee representatives. And again, this is set out on pages 123 to 124. And I've been informed the report we've taken as read. I know, Nick, I believe you wrote this report, isn't Nick's here, isn't he? Yeah, Nick. So do you have anything else you want to add, Nick?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing specifically, just to sort of reiterate, is that the local government pension scheme is actually a great success in terms of the national pensions picture, because it's a well-funded scheme that provides a very good pension for its members, whereas nationally it's almost unique in that context. And the administration, from what Ian said, I agree with him, is that the administration locally is a lot better than lots of authorities, particularly in London, and we should be thankful for that. In terms of the investments within there, take your point about climate, which we mentioned with there, that's hugely important. You talk about stranded assets, you talked about coal, it's already there. Anyone who invested in American coal producers 15 years ago has lost 80 to 90% of their money. So from a financial point of view, that's quite clear as a real risk within that. And in terms of the members, particularly the younger members, it's imperative that the climate issue is resolved, because otherwise they won't get a pension in 50 years' time. So we've got to mention, that's got to be clear in terms of our sort of duty to the members of the fund to take that into account. The other points I made in mind, which a lot of people, members of the committee, are in agreement within that, is that government proposals to try and basically force us to choose how they want our investments to go, we oppose as members, or member reps, because it's not the government's money, it's the members of the pension fund's money. And the other part is the sort of recent actuarial revaluation, which came in at 149%, which also mentioned before. I get a bit Victor Meldrew about that. I don't believe it. And we need to be careful about using that kind of estimate going forward. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. I think all valid points. I think there is a definite focus on climate change. I know the amount of work that has gone on, and I take your point about the fund valuation. It will vary year to year, and as you know, interest rates have gone up, and now they're likely to come down again. So we've got to maintain the contribution for employees. We can't just say, oh yes, we're going to give you a holiday, because it's just not going to remain like that. I tend to agree, and very much take on board the stranded asset points that have been made by a number of people in the meeting today, and we're very aware of that. And there is some really good work. I think it would be fair to say not only is our pension fund administered to a high degree, also the work that's been done on climate change is probably ahead of many other pension funds. So the next item on the agenda is the appointment of scheme member employee representatives to the local pension committee. So we have one vote. We have two nominees, Vipul Bashar and Nick Booth. Leslie Ann Panton, who was put her name forward, has withdrawn. And so votes are open to all who are present who are members of the Leicestershire County Council Pension Fund, that is active contributors, deferred members and pensioners. We have two nominations, as I said, for the position of employee representative to the local pension fund. There are two positions available. One is for a 3-year period and the other is for a residual term of 1 year to fill a recently vacated post. This is to ensure, in line with the local pension committee's terms of reference, that positions be filled on a rolling basis with an appointment to be made at each AGM. The 1-year position will therefore come up for appointment next year, and at that point, the position will be for a further usual 3 years term. As we now have two nominations to fill the post, the two posts will be filled by a secret ballot to establish which applicant will serve which term. If those of you who are entitled to vote can please raise your hands, you'll be given a voting slip for the first vote for the vote this afternoon. There's going to be one vote. You'll be asked to vote for the person you want to take the position of employee representative for 3 years. The position receiving the greatest number of votes will be elected to that position. The person who receives a lesser amount will be elected for the remaining period of 1 year. Does everybody understand that? Yeah.
As one of the people that's on the nomination, can I move that Nick gets the 3-year term, and if that's true, satisfaction?
Well, it's going to go. It's going to go to the vote. We do need to do the vote. We do need to. I mean, I'm sure the voting public will take note of what you said, Vipul. Yeah, absolutely. So let's hope it works out that way. Yeah, so if those of you who are entitled to vote, we can't do. No, I think we just need. Yeah, we need a vote. So we do need a vote, but please take notice of what's just been said when you're voting. All right. Okay, so anybody who's entitled to vote, if you can raise your hand, please. Okay. All right, we got. Yeah, I've got him. Yeah. So Andrew, there's 3 more on the back left there, 4 more. Just hang on to your votes. Don't put them in the box. We'll collect those in a minute because we don't want any going missing. So if you would like to cast your votes, bearing in mind that what has been said, we'll take a vote. There's one vote being put in the box. Bob said you'd, there's just this box here in the front. They're all going to come.
Yes, they've all got to put them in there.
All right. Joe's going around to collect them. That's good. So as long as we don't miss your vote.
You know, because he took himself.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you can guarantee that we've done that. Yeah. So the vote is that Nick Booth is taking a period of 3 years with 9 votes, and Vipal, who wanted to do the 1-year term with possible re-election for a further 3, actually got 2 votes, which I think will probably determined by your speech before the vote, Vipal. But that's a good result, I think, for everybody. And we'll see again next year when it comes to a 3-year vote. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. We now move on to we've received to the position appointment of the scheme members representative to the local pension board, which is we had the report earlier on. We have received 2 nominations for the positions of the scheme member representative. They are Anthony Cross and Andrew Stewart. If there is one position to be held for a period of 3 years, and a secret ballot will be held, the person receiving the greatest number of votes will be appointed. So this is one position for 3 years. There's also a vacancy for the reserve scheme member representative, whose role will be to substitute in the absence of an employee representative at the local pension board meeting. The person not elected for the 3-year post will therefore be offered this position. Both nominees have been contacted and confirmed they're willing to take the position of reserve employee representative not elected for 3 years. So we'll now begin the secret ballot, and as before, if you just hold your hands up so we can see who can actually vote, and she will come along. I think she's probably got a better memory than me. She knows exactly who can vote. Okay, thanks very much. So the employee representative, the representative of the board is going to be Anthony Cross, who obtained 6 votes, and the substitute is going to be Andrew Stewart, who received 5 votes. So thanks very much for that. The next item is the date of the next pension fund annual meeting in 2024. I move that the date of the next pension fund annual meeting in 2024 be held on the 9th of December 2024, and this date be publicised on the fund's website. Is everybody in agreement with that? Yeah, that's unanimous then. That's fine. As mentioned earlier, there are no urgent items. Offices will be available for a short period of time after the meeting closes for conversation with you. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. It's nice to see a good turnout at the AGM. I now declare the meeting closed.